we don't pay for that. So it's different than the standard bid process where you actually have to pay to bid something out, and then if you decide not to do the project, you just eat that money that you spent. And so you guys bidding out all of these projects, we can take a look at those projects when they come back and decide whether or not, we like the numbers that we're getting and make the decision then about whether or not, it makes sense to move forward on all of those things, right?
That's correct.
And the reason for that is all of these projects fit comfortably within what a GISA project allows by law, which is traditionally mechanical, electrical, plumbing, building envelopes. All of these are, we can show energy savings applicability to that. So there are certain projects that have to go that design bid build route, but with these types of scopes of work, in our opinion, it makes sense because you save yourself those engineer and design fees up front and at no risk. You have your costs, you consider what you want to do with known project costs, and then you elect to move forward at that point.
Right, because typically when you're bidding it out, then your engineering firm is actually doing a thorough markup of this so that you give them the appropriate information to bid on, but then they are calculating into that they're going to have to redo all of those engineering, services themselves, because they're going to make sure that they have that their people have done it to be able to move forward with the project, so you're kind of paying for it twice, or in this scenario, you don't pay for it twice, so that's the cost savings that you're talking about.
You actually don't even pay for 100% design because you don't have to with this process. So the design fees are significantly lower with this process.
We don't have to go to 100% design is what he's saying. So there's less design hours as far as development because we're going to do this under design build process, working directly with the installing contractor so they know where their risk is rather than in the traditional design bid build. We've got to go to 100% design documents because they're bidding every nook and cranny of the job. They need to know exactly what's in it. If not, we're issuing a change order. That's the other advantage of this. Small jobs like this, they're scalable as far as their fees. The cost at the beginning of the job is the cost at the end. There's no threat to change order by law. We can't issue a change order to the GISA. So if you approve these jobs, that's the cost you're approving at the beginning of the job and at the end. And again, when we do bring them back to you, they'll still be in menu form. So things you might not want to do at that time, okay, hey, maybe this didn't come in at best value pricing. We can discuss that. Get it out of here. We're only going to select these three. Also, we don't have to go through a formal alternate process. So if we want to scale a project down and say, hey, I don't really like that number. I only want to do, these three buildings, say we're doing like, lighting across 6. We don't like what came in for all 6 buildings. We like what came in for 3. We like what came in for the exterior lighting. We can just go to exterior lighting. We can work directly with the contractor after he presents the cost to scale down his job or to scale up based off of what we see from a financial standpoint. So we don't have to go through the formal add alternate process. So it gives us more flexibility to commingle the scope into a budget after we have hard costs.
Thank you.
Any questions?
I just want to thank all three companies.
Yes.
Reynolds, Schrader, K&N. The process that they've gone through in terms of coming in very, very quickly, getting to know our buildings. The principals have been very impressed with the thoroughness, but also the fact that they've been very respectful of teachers and kids because they've often been in during the day. They have not been an impact that way. They've brought the stakeholders to the table, right? We've talked athletics, we've talked nutrition, we've talked operations, we've talked to transportation, right? Those people who we know will be impacted by some of the things we're talking about. They've been very responsive to, we've had multiple meetings that way and very comprehensive. So I just really thank each of you for the work that you've done so far and for your presentation tonight.
Thank you.
Okay? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Danielle, if we can change back that, please, thank you. Just gonna change over computers. Go back to
Very helpful.
That's okay.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Danielle, thank you for that. So October 1st, as I'm sure each of you knows, is a significant day in schools because it's the day where that's our official enrollment, although our enrollment enrollment is different every day, those are the numbers we submit to the state. And so October 1st is always a significant, because forever this will be what the 1920 school year says we had, regardless of whether it goes up or down by 80 between now and the end of the school year. And so I just wanted to give you a sense for where that was, because obviously as we've talked about our facility utilization study that was done a couple years ago, in terms of where we are from a trend standpoint, as well as then what it looks like at the elementary level, because those predictions were intending the elementary level to be impacted the most, right? So if you look from a standpoint of, let me just orient you to this slide in terms of the information that is there. The utilization report started with the data from 16-17, was doing the work during the data for 17-18, which is why both the 16-17 and 17-18 data is very accurate, because they were dealing with pretty live numbers in terms of where they were. So if you look at the report versus the actual, which is the first to the second column, they are very consistent. Now, the report itself, if you remember, had 3 different projections. It did the projections from the Pennsylvania Economic League, it did projections from the Department of Education, and then they had a company that was called Decision Insight that did projections, both conservative and moderate projections. For the report numbers, I took the 3 enrollment projections and averaged them, right? And so the chart that they gave had that Economic League, the Department of Education, and the moderate estimate from the Decision Insight. I averaged them in the report, and so that's that first column if we look at 1920. That's the column marked in the report. And so I had showed you these in the spring and had estimated October 1st. One of the things that I began this past year, surprise, surprise, is to look for trends in our projections. What we try to do is as we're deciding on class sizes and the number of sections, is we try to do that in March as much as possible. The problem is primarily in kindergarten and first grade, there is a great fluctuation of how many students come into the district, because it's hard to predict kindergarten. It's hard to predict how many students were out for full-day kindergarten or coming in for first grade or moving in from someplace. And so what I pulled was, I pulled our 5-year average at every elementary school, because it is not the same. There are some elementary schools that there's very little fluctuation between kindergarten and first grade, and there are some where it is very substantial in terms of the number of students who move in from when we do that. So I ran numbers from March to October 1st for the last 5 years, and then also May to October 1st to try to get a sense for how fine-tuned can we make those predictions, because we have some play in May as we look at sections and trying to do that. One of the reasons was sister schooling, to try to do a better job of predicting sections so that we were anticipating students. The past process was to use those numbers and lock them in. Even though we knew that we're going to be 40 more students moving in, over the summer, the district just kind of said, we're just going to do this, and that's from a financial standpoint. I understand why it was done, but then that is what made sister schooling something that was a little more prevalent from that standpoint. So what we have found, if you look at the numbers themselves, at the elementary level, primarily kindergarten and first grade, our numbers are a little above what the report had indicated, where our middle school and our high school numbers are a little below what the report had indicated. So in terms of the enrollment still from last year to this year did in fact go down. They were predicting at the elementary level for it to go down about 100. It looks like we're going to be down about 60. And so there's a plus 40 or a minus 60, depending on how you look at it in terms of their enrollment projections. And that is primarily kindergarten and first grade, but not only kindergarten and first grade. From a move-in standpoint, we had 230 registrations that happened between August 1st and the beginning of school. And according to Ms. Tina Young, who's our registrar, that is the highest number that she has ever seen in terms of families that last month of the year to come in. And it's not like the months prior to that it was slow. She was on a pretty normal track in terms of projections, and then we just had more students move in. Now, I say move in because that doesn't mean they actually moved into the district, although that could be some of them. They decided to enroll in Pennridge, either in kindergarten or in first grade. And so from that standpoint, that is a 2-year trend, that we had the same situation last year in terms of that from an enrollment projection standpoint, the fact that it wasn't exactly what they had said, it was primarily kindergarten and first grade. We've had a few more move-ins in 4th grade and 5th grade than we've had in other years that account for some of that. So that's this piece. Then I wanted to show you what the impact was in elementary school. So this is a chart by grade level. It's the classroom average for the current year across all 7, as well as the guide that the district has. We don't have a policy that says that we don't go above this, but we do have guidelines that we use. Those guidelines are there by grade level in terms of 25 through 30 at the elementary level. I then showed the indication of how many sections we currently have in the district who are at or above, but in this case all at the guideline average. You can see in first grade we have 4, and that really is because the projections were not accurate this year because we had more students move in, right? So the 5-year average would have indicated fewer students coming in first grade. We had more than that. And so in some buildings, there are 4 sections across all of our first grade where they are sitting at 27 students. And so that is why the classroom average is higher in first grade than it is in second grade, right? When you look at those numbers, should basically sneak up, as you go up the grade levels, at least within the span. We had one where we had some move-ins in 5th grade, so there was one section sitting at 30. We don't have any other sections that are currently sitting at the guideline from that standpoint in terms of where that sits from there, okay? So that's just information on the questions you have or other data you'd like to see.
Well,
I could pull for you.
I would just like to point out, when you talk about, obviously the enrollment is less than what was predicted, but also, there are now 7 classrooms, 1 in each building, that's being utilized for STEM. So that takes up potentially, if you calculated the highest average, it could be up to 30 kids a class for 7 classrooms. I mean, that's 210 seats really that are, not available because of the STEM program that's in the elementary schools. And so we needed a classroom for each of those programs. So that's, actually, it looks like a little bit above even what the drop was. So we're taking up more of those spaces even with STEM than what had been predicted as a drop. And then that also doesn't, we also have those 2 pre-K counts classes
Three
as well.
this year.
3.
We have 3. They're not both. There's only 2 per grade class, but we also have another class. Now, our elementary schools are not underutilized from a classroom space, which I think is what your point is.
Right.
That we took advantage of some spaces. Yeah, that's true.
I'm understanding that there's 1 5th grade class that has 30 students
Correct.
in it. Are there any other supports that we offer when they reach that max number?
So when we try not to hit the max number,
Yeah, that's all.
right? And so at every level, those numbers are truly guidelines for the top end, although you can see from a class average standpoint, we have, most of them are
Most of them.
very healthy numbers. Now, 2 things that happen. One, at the intermediate level, we're taking systems where they've always had 3 sections or always had 2 sections, and they've always been large. There are good numbers and bad numbers when you're doing class size. So when you have 58 students in 5th grade, is that 2 sections or 3? Because it's either 2 big sections or 3 small sections based off the guidelines. And so as those age through the system, the initial reinvestment was back at the primary level to try to keep those classrooms smaller. Because those classrooms already had. So from 4th to 5th grade, that class that was 30 was 29 last year. And so that they had large numbers. There was a move-in, there actually were 2. And so the classes went from 29 and 28 to 30 and 29 in terms of where they moved. And so then what we do anytime, because we actually have some classrooms like at 4th grade where there's 29 students, they don't show up on this chart, but what we do is we provide teaching assistance once we get to what we consider to be too full. And we're not using the 30 numbers, although obviously if we get to 30, we then provide another adult in that room, and we look for a certified teacher, although they're a teaching assistant. And then primarily, now that's not, we allow the teachers and the principals some flexibility, but primarily they target then the literacy and the math blocks and try to be in both rooms or all 3 rooms if it's 3 sections that we're talking about that are on the large side, as opposed to just that classroom where there's 30. Because if there's 30 in one classroom, the other one has 28 or 29. Sometimes from a special ed standpoint, it might not be 1 off, it might be 2 off because of the students that are in the classrooms.
I was gonna say, do you wait until it gets to that max number? Because I had heard, and I don't know if it's true or not, but at Sellersville, there's 2 second grades and they are at like 27. I don't know, like, if then you consider, even though they're not at the 28, which is the guide for second grade, would you offer a teaching assistant, or they might have a teaching assistant, I don't even know, this was just a parent that complained.
And I don't know that specific,
Beginning of the
I'd have to
school
look
year,
up that, I'd have to look up that specific, you're talking
Okay.
about in terms of the number of students that are actually in that space and things.
Okay.
But the answer to your question really is yes, those additional adults are determined before we get to the
Got
guidelines. If we're to the standpoint where we're like, you know what, we've had some movements. We had a situation in one school where we had in an intermediate grade, we had 5 movements this summer. That doesn't happen routinely, that in one school, in one intermediate grade, it wasn't first grade, we had 5 new students in the same intermediate grade. That does take your class size up 2 or 3 per class, depending, and that's on the higher end. So it's when we looked at that and went, okay, we need another adult there. They didn't get to the 30, but they were high enough, and it was a change from what they had felt the year before in terms of what those families are used to in terms of that standpoint. So, and there are, I mean, within each of those, we could find you a 3rd grade class that's at 26 or 27, and if you're talking to that teacher and that parent, there's going to be concerns, and that is rightly so, and we do what we can in terms of resources in Title I aids, and there's other adults
Right.
in the buildings that we utilize, but from a standpoint of actually providing adults to that. And these at or above numbers are far lower than they have been in the last 5 years. That-
Kindergarten is
our
extremely
class
happy.
size, right. And you know that our commitment from a literacy standpoint is K through 3, right? We have made a significant reinvestment in terms of staffing, is why our kindergarten or 2nd grade numbers are as low as they've ever been from a class size. 1st grade would have been that had our projections held, right? And so I'm gonna have to think about skewing the projections. I mean, now I'm gonna use the 5-year average, and this will be part of that 5 years, so it'll skew up a little bit. And if we have another year like we had this year, we'll have to really think about what we do in 1st grade, whether we keep one in our pocket, whether we go back to sister schooling. You know, we'll have to have that conversation, but right now it's a 1-year trend, so I'd rather not make determinations off of 1 year. But if it happens again, we'll need to have that conversation about how would you prefer to handle that, and what we would choose to do. Okay?
And the ones that got really close to that 4th grade you're talking about, those 5 kids were like right at the very end after you already sent out the teacher, like, the teacher announcements to
For
them,
the 5
for
ones,
the,
yeah.
from,
Yeah. Yes, 4 of those 5 came after teacher assignments are, and that is I did back up teacher assignments in terms of when they were communicated at each grade level to provide us enough time to try to adjust sections if we had to. So that if we got move-ins at the beginning of August, because I'm always surprised the number of families who turn the calendar August and go, oh, look, I have a 6-year-old. and that's probably a little too sarcastic, but that is truly what happens annually, not just this year. And so we do try to wait as long as we can, because there is a lot of ownership. Once you announce the teacher and you know who's in your class, it is really hard to add a section. To say, you know what, I know we're gonna be with your best friend, but now we're mixing them up. And it's a good reason to add a section, but I'm not sure which way to take it. You know, that's always very difficult. So we made it a little later in August this year, to be able to do that, but still, 1st grade and a couple of the individual sections were much later than they had been from a registration standpoint. I think it's because Penridge is awesome.
I was gonna say.
We'll see.
That's what I heard in my mind.
We'll
I was gonna say, we just had, everybody
I
was
was telling
immediate.
you, before the advent of sister schooling, in fact, when I first came on the board, the decision for sections was made the night of the first day of school.
Wow.
That's pushing out.
And it was quite an interesting adventure.
I can imagine.
the night before,
So when
The night of
did
the
they
first
find
day of
out?
school.
so the night after, like the end of
First
the
day of
day,
school.
or
At
the
the end of the
before?
day.
So you could have already went to school in one class and then day 2
Yes,
you're in a new class?
absolutely, it did happen.
Right, so everybody showed up and they went, oh, look, we got 72,
Yeah,
now
right.
we're gonna rearrange you.
Mhm.
Wow,
Ah.
wow.
That's okay. You were in one big
And
class
then
and then
that
you
was
all.
moved
Could you
back.
imagine, that was before the internet, right?
No,
Could you
not
imagine
before the
that?
internet, but before people used the internet. The internet's been around a while, right? It just depends on how you mean before the internet.
Before social
And
media.
free shopping, yeah, exactly, yeah.
Wow.
But then it was moved back into, I think it was the 3rd Monday in August.
I love it.
That's when all the decisions were made about classroom assignments.
And in practicality, however, the sections were determined far before that, at least the recent history of the district, is that we didn't communicate until that third week in August, but the determination, many teachers knew before they left in June, and students were just simply added, and when the cap was hit, they sister schooled when there were move-ins.
But that
And-
wasn't true before sister
Correct.
school.
Exactly
At that
right.
point, it was
Right.
really an August
Because
decision.
you couldn't, right,
Well,
right, you had to
They
at
didn't,
least
so
hold
whether
it
you
down.
could or not, right?
So. Okay, so, thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving on to obsolete items, Mr. Talbert.
Okay, under obsolete, I have Gabler, we have 4 different lists this month. 2 lists are some equipment items, various items. And then the second 2 lists are with textbooks that are being sent to public surplus. At the high school, we have a chair that's broken, it needs to be strapped. The legs, so we're getting rid of that. Maintenance department, we have some digital disc recorder and matrix switcher that are gonna go to public surplus. And then, yeah, that's it. I missed one, but
Okay.
I got it.
Questions, concerns? Okay, move that forward? All right. Change order, Mr. Harper.
So,
Change order.
so the good news is
Yeah,
that
start with that.
the project is underway and they're moving forward. However, the company doing the work ran into a substantial amount of rock when they were excavating. So we have 20-foot poles that are going up.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
In East Rock Hill.
You could
Imagine
have asked
that.
us.
So, even thinking about it, so if you can imagine where the synthetic turf is and the all-weather track, this is in the all-weather track. So I think some of the assumption was that this whole area was excavated, repaired, stoned, but I would say outside the turf, right where they're at, was not so. It hit a substantial amount of rock, and if you look at the details on this, it took them over a day, about 9 extra hours of rental equipment, man-hours, different attachments to break through the rock, and totaling $3,648.12. It was one of those unforeseen conditions, it was under the track, it wasn't expected. Even in the contract that we signed with them, they have exclusions with those sort of findings. If you have substantial rock, they list that. The expectation is it's an easy dig, they expected to get it done in 1 day, and that wasn't the case.
Showed up at Rock Hill.
That's why I don't dig in my backyard.
No.
There is no
right.
digging.
So they hit it at 18 feet.
Inches. No,
Well,
Wait,
Well, that's
it
what I
does say
was
feet.
saying, it says 18.
It does say
So
feet.
that would be, we didn't go that deep.
It says feet.
Okay, I was gonna say, what are you doing here?
It does say feet.
Yeah.
I thought it was a typo.
You're right.
42 to 48 inches deep, and then 18 inches is where they encountered the rock.
Oh,
And I witnessed it, they called me to come up and look at it. I saw the conditions, it was legitimate.
Oh, so Kelly, we just need you to confirm that that's a typo. It's supposed to say 18 inches, not
18
18
inches.
feet.
Confirm, put
Okay.
another,
apostrophe.
we weren't digging wells.
Yeah.
So they-
Somebody didn't hit the shift key. That's all. that-
It's all good, we just wanna make sure.
And what was the original cost for this? Do you remember?
About $46,000. So even thinking through the process, this is one of the biggest components of the job, digging the foundations, pouring the concrete, putting the sleeves in, which is done now. The rest of it is just fabrication of the 20-foot poles, the netting that goes in between. So really at this point, and they were actually patching the synthetic all-weather track today, so they can come in, drop the poles in, put the hardware on, raise the nets, and the job's over.
Awesome.
I'd say by the end of the month, so it's in fabrication now, the poles and the netting, by the end of the month, this should be functional.
Questions, issues? Sounds good.
It's the typo.
Just fix it.
People know that you like.
Duly noted. Okay,
Well, just because people might look and say, well,
Absolutely.
you're paying for a change order,
Yeah, on a
why
well.
were you digging 18 feet? Just,
looking for more.
yeah.
Gold,
found it.
water.
We just
And some
went-
oil,
We were
too.
doing an underground vault go and install.
Dinosaur
Any
over
questions
there,
there?
I don't know.
Anything? Children, okay. Everybody okay with moving that forward? Sounds good to these people? All right. Good deal. What is next on the agenda? The modification to existing restroom in high school nursing suite. Who wants to jump on this one? Jump.
So I'm not sure how much information we gave you about this project, but the background is there's a student with special needs coming from Central Middle School, and this restroom situation was accommodated at the school. It's not ADA, it's special clearances. I don't know if we included the lift and all the other details in here, but they actually use a lift to raise this student out of the wheelchair to get him onto the toilet facility. They need space on both sides so staff can help accommodate this process. So what we did is, and this is a process that developed over the summer, working with Dr. Wayurka, Dr. Cashman, and others, looking at where we could do this, where's most appropriate in the school, looked at different areas in the school, and finally landed at the nurse's office. They have a single restroom, and to the right of this, there's a staff break room. So the most bang for the buck is to modify the space, and the simple version of it is we're moving two of the restroom walls, one out a little deeper, one to the right, shrinking the break room. So there's plumbing, electrical, doors, ceiling, lighting, a lot of those things are involved. The reason that we looked at this KPN version is because of timing. So we're really trying to satisfy the patience of the students' parents that we're going to accommodate her needs, reasonable accommodations. Going with this KPN version will fast track it, that we could get it done in a short period of time. If we were to bid this project, it would take us at least 2 to 3 more months to even get to the point where they could do construction. Whereas this, if we give them the green light, they're gonna schedule within 2 weeks to start this work. And it's working off hours, and again, this is KPN, so it's a cooperative purchasing vehicle, so we don't have to bid it. They have standardized rates, and there's a lot of details in this packet. Any questions? Something doesn't make sense, or more details?
So somebody's gonna have to fill me in here, maybe it's a combination of people. So this is an accommodation for the student, not an educational need, right?
So I'm the right person to answer those
So
questions.
isn't there a secondary process, a 504 or something that covers accommodations for the student facility-wise that we can tap into some federal or state monies?
So I would not believe that the access funds are accessible for construction
Okay.
pieces from an accessibility standpoint, although I can check into that. I've never heard of those funds being used for construction items. Because this is actually through the IUP process, but it would be the same usage of funds. So I would have to check that to see whether we have any reimbursements that we could make for any of this.
Okay, just
Yeah, no,
curiosity.
it's a good question to ask, so that we could recoup some.
Yeah, and this is only the construction, not the lift itself.
Right, the lift has already been purchased, they have it in place, I believe they used it at Central, and we looked at all those things. I actually asked our new friends Reynolds to develop a scope of work. They provided the drawing for this, I mean, not a whole detailed bid package, but at least some options, some scope, so that whether we bid it or we went through this kind of process, that we have something professionally done for us.
One way or another, we gotta do this.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah, you know, that's the end of it,
Yeah.
the real piece of it, one way or another, we have to do this.
And the timing piece
No matter
is,
who's paying for it.
Would we get a better price if we put it out to bid?
so that's a good question.
Cause we don't need it till next year.
No,
So
we
you need
need
one
now.
yesterday.
Students here now.
The student's here.
They're making.
So why didn't we do this last year?
Sorry,
Why didn't it happen last year?
They were
Because
at
gonna
Central.
be here.
they were at Central, why
Right.
didn't we do this last year?
Right.
That's a great question, it was
Oh,
brought to
okay.
me in June, to say, hey, there's a student coming, we need to do this, maybe they thought it was a
Right.
simple change.
From a
It's
timing
not.
standpoint, that
Yeah.
it was considered in June during a transition meeting.